Alright, we are going to watch another Mr. Ballin video, and after I watched Fire in the Sky, I decided to look up the true story of Travis Walton, and then I saw Mr. Ballin pop up, and I think you guys can tell the rest from there. I wanted to watch this to get the real story. I did a movie reaction. Movie reaction for Fire in the Sky is up on my Patreon and members right now, so I have to do is become a member to watch that movie reaction, but I'm going to go ahead and dive into the real story because I am really curious to know if they changed a lot up because of the movie, you know? That's what Hollywood does sometimes, is they like to change things up for the purpose of just the movie. And I want to see if the true story is really that far off. So hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. We're on our way to 30,000 subscribers. The goal is hitting 30,000 before Christmas. If you guys can help me out with that, I'd really much appreciate it. If you love the spooky stuff and the fun, creepy stuff, then I'm going to continue to watch this content. So let's go ahead and dive into the video, and I'll give you guys my thoughts during and after the video.
Many people have claimed over the years to have been abducted by aliens, and realistically there's no tangible evidence that any human being has ever actually set foot in an extraterrestrial spacecraft or another dimension or anything like that. It's just these crazy stories from people that claim this happened to them. And while many of these stories are very quickly cast aside as absolute hoax,
unfortunately,
not true, not accurate, there's one story, one abduction story, that is universally regarded as the most believable and most famous alien abduction story, and that is of Travis Walton. What made this case so famous is that unlike all of the other alien abduction cases where there was never any proof, it was usually one person's first-hand account. In this case, you have a full-scale police investigation. You have up to 16 lie detector tests that were taken by Travis Walton himself, along with the other witnesses and people that were there. And you have a group of 6 level-headed guys that actually witnessed the abduction take place and have stuck to their story and have passed all lie detector tests and have never changed their story in 40 years. And you would think that at some point you might change your story because they came under incredible scrutiny. I mean, it basically derailed most of their careers and their lives because they were labeled as crazy people for believing that a UFO had abducted Travis Walton. I mean, in a way, they became famous, but in all the worst ways. So you have all these elements that make this story seem fairly credible. And even if this wasn't an alien abduction, let's say, how do you account for the past lie detector tests that are talking about UFOs?
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's like the fact that they all passed the lie detector test, besides apparently that one guy who it was just kind of too weird to kind of make it out, but everybody else passed the lie detector test. And these are just random guys. So the fact that that happened, I mean, it's pretty bizarre. It's pretty bizarre. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool to actually hear that actually happened in real life. Like, obviously, I kind of had a feeling it probably happened in real life. I don't know why the movie would throw that out there just to make it up and just have it. I feel like, yeah, that would actually happen. The fact that it actually did happen, and that's confirmation right there, really cool. I'd love to hear that.
How do you account for the fact that Travis Walton was really missing for 5 days and has no idea where he was? And there was a full search effort to find him in the area where he would have been. So lots of unanswered questions, but the story itself of when he was actually abducted, and then his own story about what happened once he had been abducted, it makes for just an incredible story. It's been converted into books and movies, and to this day, it remains one of, if not the single most fascinating purported alien abduction stories ever. But before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well then you come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3 to 4 of these stories every week. So if that's something that interests you, I would encourage you to gently extirpate the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads.
Man, you know I got you.
Let's dive into the story. By 1975, Travis Walton, who was 22 years old at the time, had developed a bad boy.
Oh, the music in the video. I thought something was coming up behind me, dude. I'm jumpy.
boy reputation in his hometown of Snowflake, Arizona. You know, he rode a noisy Harley-Davidson motorcycle through town. He was a wild bull rider, and he was a boxer. And there was this story about Travis when he was with his friends in a car and they were driving down this road, and a bear jumped out of the woods and landed in the middle of the road and was just standing there. And Travis, without any hesitation, leaps out of his car and chases after this huge bear and scares it into the woods, and in fact chased it up into the woods.
That would okay, that would explain why he did the same thing with this UFO. Nobody in their right mind would get out of a car and chase off a bear. This guy actually did it. So he was just a daredevil. So now it makes more sense, because I'm sitting here thinking, why the F did you get out of the vehicle and run up to this thing when you have no idea what it is? But it seems like this is something this guy was just normally doing anyways. No fucking way.
So Travis was just known as this kind of rebel, problem child a little bit, but he was beloved by his friends. He was just like one of those cool guys that he did it his own way. So Travis and the 6 other men that he worked with were loggers. They were given contracts, and they would go out and they would clear trees in a certain area. They were not big time with huge equipment to do this. We're talking chainsaws, saw and regular saws and axes. And they would just go out, these blue collar, like hard working type guys, and they would clear areas of trees. That's what they did. Now these 7 men, they did a dangerous job. I mean, you're cutting down these huge trees, and you're usually working pretty quickly. You're operating, chainsaws that are pretty dangerous. And Mike Rogers, who was the crew boss, who's there the day of this event, he described in a number of his interviews that the men that he hired to do these jobs, they needed to be incredibly level-headed. It did not strike you as people that would have this fantastical, alien encounter story. On November 5th, 1975, Mike Rogers was given a contract to clear out this huge 1,200-acre plot of land inside of the Sitgreaves National Forest. And he grabbed his crew, they piled into the one pickup truck that Mike owned, and Mike knew that this was going to be a really, really difficult job. It was a huge area to cover, and he told his men up front, we're going to be working really, really hard, so expect long, full days. And so over the first 3 days of the job, even though they were working, long, long hours and barely taking any breaks, they were behind schedule. At the end of this 3rd day, it's late at night, they've worked all day, and everybody is just totally exhausted. And so finally they wrap up, and they all pile back into Mike's truck, all 7 of them.
It's pretty cool now that I listen to the story being told, especially by somebody like Mr. Ballen. It's like I can compare, and this was something I was going to do anyways. I was going to compare the movie to the real story. It's really neat to actually sit here and listen to how much they actually got right about the movie. Not a lot of movies do that. Not a lot of movies just listen to the full story and actually present it the way it is. But he sounds like he's actually just describing the movie to me, which is kind of a cool feeling. It just like gives me, I like that. I like that they actually paid real homage to it.
And they start driving the access road back down to the main road to get back to the town. And as they're driving, they're not really talking about work at all. They're kind of joking about what they're going to do that night. And as they're driving down the road, and again, it's heavily forested, they look off to the right, and there is some lights in the forest. They would say in interviews that they all noticed it, but it did not stand out as anything particularly bad. It just could be anything. They weren't thinking about it. But as they were driving down this road, and this light, I guess, got brighter, or maybe they couldn't help but notice it, they all started commenting on this light, and they're looking at it, and somebody suggested that, oh, it's probably just the moon, it's a full moon. But then one of the guys on the other side of the truck happened to look out his side, away from where that light was, and he goes, no, the moon's over here, it's on this side of the road. So they're like, okay, it's not the moon. And then someone suggested, oh, well, maybe it's a forest fire. Like, maybe we should go check it out. That could be a forest fire. But then Mike Rogers, the driver, the crew boss, was like, no, there'd be smoke. There's no smoke or anything. And Travis, who, he's the guy that's jumping out of cars to go chase down bears.
Let's go take a look.
He's like a total kind of adrenaline junkie type. He's like, hey, let's just drive over there and see what it is. Like, I don't know, it could be anything. Let's go check it out. The guys in the truck were a little on edge about it, but ultimately said, what's the harm? We'll drive over. We know there's a road that brings us over to that section of the forest. We'll get a look at whatever this is, and then we'll leave. So they drive down this other little access road, and they come to a clearing where these lights were. And
okay, so the lights in real life weren't red like the movie presented. Like, the forest fire, like they saw red lights in the movie and it was just glowing red, and you're just sitting there like, okay, so yeah, it looks like a forest fire, but in real life, they actually mistook it for the moon at one point. If it was just red, it wouldn't have been mistaken as the moon. Okay, I'm seeing the little change up here and everything.
They are astounded at what they see. They were all polygraphed separately about what they saw when they reached this clearing. Each of them described the same thing with slightly different details because it's from their own perspective, and the polygraph tests all showed that they were telling the truth. They saw this disc-shaped craft with what looked like panels of lights on the underside, hovering in a clearing maybe 50 or 100 feet off the ground, not spinning or anything, just floating in midair as if it was suspended. And the men, in their interviews later on TV shows and books, they would say what struck them was not just the fact that there's this craft here, but how bizarre it was to see this thing defying gravity. It's not moving, but it's hovering over the air, and it's right in front of us. And one of the men even commented at length, because he would build houses, and he was a handy guy.
So he knew what he was talking about, yeah.
He started talking about the structural framework of this craft. He could see that there was really impressive engineering on the underside of this craft. It was just a beautiful machine. And they're looking at it, and Travis is so excited when they get to this clearing. He doesn't even know what he's looking at, but much like the bear, where he jumps out and chases
just runs toward it.
As soon as they were almost at a stop in this clearing right next to the ship, he's jumping out of the car. Nobody else is, just Travis.
Travis, get your ass back here!
Just a little ways away from the car towards this craft. The craft doesn't move. The craft is maybe from where they parked, maybe 50 or 100 feet away from them, and then 50 or 100 feet in the air. And the crew doesn't say anything. They're just dumbfounded by what they're looking at. Travis is also dumbfounded, but he's walking towards the ship. And he would say in an interview that he was frightened, but he was mostly curious. He knew he was looking.
And you know what happens to curiosity killed the cat. We all know, right?
At something that no one knew what it was. Some sort of craft.
Except he didn't die.
But it was fascinating to him, and he kept walking closer and closer and closer to it. And as the crew kind of came out of their initial shock of seeing this unidentified flying object in the sky,
that's when they started
yelling for Travis
get
to come
your
back.
ass back here.
They had this bad sense that something was going to happen, and they thought you shouldn't go near it. Like, come back. Not to mention it's hovering in the air. What if it falls and it lands on you? Like, hey, Travis,
you don't know what it is, yeah.
And then it was like once one person started yelling for Travis to come back, they all did. And so Travis remembered hearing them screaming for him to come back to the car. But he's not really paying any attention. He's still walking. And finally he stops. He's just looking at it. And Travis would say he was just struck at just the beauty of the underside of this craft with all these different panels of lights built into it. It was this incredible piece of machinery. And he's looking at it, and then all of a sudden it starts...
I saw it, Eddie. I saw it. I looked right into his deadlights. And I wanted to be there. What quote is that from? Tell me what movie quote that is from. Down below.
Spinning. Just a little bit. And it starts emitting this noise that all of them reported hearing. This loud mechanical sound. And now the yells from the crew are getting louder and louder. And Travis would say that he knew he needed to turn around and go back. But he just wanted to look for a few more seconds. And he was about to turn and go back to the truck when all of a sudden a beam of light comes out and strikes Travis like a lightning strike. And all of the crew saw this happen. He gets blown 20 feet away. Like he gets lifted off the ground and thrown 20 feet. And they watched it happen. And again, in all of their polygraph tests, they all said the same thing. All passed. He was hit by a ray of light from this UFO, knocked him 20 feet back. Mike Rogers, in a panic, along with everybody else in the crew, they just decide to leave. And they're convincing themselves, as Mike is driving away like a maniac,
you can't blame them,
leaving Travis behind, they're convincing themselves that he's dead already. We just watched him get shot by something. We don't know what that is. And they're freaked out. They don't even know what they saw. They're crying. They're hysterical. These are grown men, just absolutely terrified. And they're driving a little ways until finally Mike just hits the brakes.
I mean, it goes to show that, that we're afraid of the things we just do not understand. And now this is back in the 70s where UFOs aren't really talked about all that much, right? I mean, I'm sure they were talked about, but they weren't like as talked about like as much as today. So to even see this thing, and then, to see your buddy just get shot back like 20 feet, I mean, what else are you supposed to expect, right? I mean, that just makes sense to me. And the fact that they drove off, I mean, it's up for argument whether that was the right decision or wrong decision. I don't really think it was the wrong decision. I think automatically, especially just not knowing exactly what you're dealing with, probably was the right response at the time. Now, obviously, he's okay now, right? I mean, Travis is okay now, but at the end of the day, he's the one who chose to walk over to this thing not knowing what it was, and he's the one who got shot. I mean, at that point, what else are you supposed to do? Yeah, hit the gas and get in a drive and just book it. Like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't imagine what that must have been like, especially in the moment. I mean, that was one of their best friends, and they automatically just said fuck this and got out of there. And you can't blame them, right? You can't blame them at the end of the day. Like, a lot of people want to talk about what they would do in situations, right? They want to talk about, like, oh, I would never leave my fucking friends to die. No, fuck that. But you don't really know unless you're thrown into that situation yourself. And I think that was a good example of, like, just not knowing what you would do unless you were put in that situation. And that kind of shows what they would do if they thought their buddy was killed in front of them. They would just get the fuck out of there. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine what that must have been like.
And he stops. And Mike is like, we have to go back for him. He was like, if you guys want to stay here and wait for me, that's fine. But this truck is going back to get Travis. And so the idea of waiting out in the open
Mike's a
after
G.
seeing what they just saw was
He's a badass.
even worse than going back. They wanted to stay together.
You know what, though? I'll say this. Maybe deep down he felt like he had to go back, right? So he already knew that he was going to drive a good distance, let his friends out, and go back for his buddy. That's a fucking true friend right there. He was thinking about his other buddies, but was also thinking about Travis at the same time, wanting to get his other friends to safety before he decided he wanted to go back there and try to see if Travis was still around, right? I mean, that right there is like, you only wish you had a friend like that who would do that. Make sure that, you know, get his buddies to safety, but make sure he also goes back for his other friend, because he doesn't know what just happened to him. I mean, that's a lot of guts, especially thinking about what he had just witnessed. That's a lot of guts.
So a little bit begrudgingly, although they knew they needed to, they all got back in the truck, turned around, and started driving back up to the UFO site. As they make it back up, they notice that there is no lights up there. You know, the craft is gone, and there's no Travis.
So they all went back. No way.
Mike is uncontrollably crying because he feels like they just abandoned him, and where did he go? Everybody else is in shock. They can't believe it. They start screaming for Travis. They're running around the woods, yelling for Travis, looking for signs of Travis. They really don't know what happened, but they know Travis is not here. And after a little bit of time of looking, they're like, we have to tell the police. And they knew that it was going to be bad for them when they told police. Yep. The story is a UFO came and zapped Travis and now he's gone. That doesn't really sit well with police. But they knew
murderers.
They wanted to find Travis and they were very concerned about their friend. They knew they had to tell police.
Man, they were risking everything. They were risking their own fucking public status just to go and make sure their friend was safe. You know what? At the end of the day, I don't really care if you find them crazy. That is some next level fucking dedication right there. Like, they had each other's backs, you could tell. And obviously people are going to be like, you know, well, yeah, say that now after they fucking left the guy to die. Who are we to, like, tell what would have been the right choice in that moment or not? The fact of the matter is they went back. Travis did it on his own. He's the one who walked out there and decided to put himself in harm's way. And there was certainly no way that, you know, they were going to just put all of themselves in harm's way against something that they just truly did not understand at the time. So at the end of the day, I really don't think, again, there's really a truly right or wrong answer for this. I'll tell you this for a fact. If this ever happened to me, if I was the one who walked out there and got zapped by something and my friends decided they wanted to take off because they had no idea if I was dead or not, like a UFO or something, I'd probably forgive them, because I think I would have, who knows, I probably would have done the same thing in their shoes. Now, the fact of the matter is they came back later, which is, again, a lot of guts considering that they just witnessed that.
And a few of the other crew were just unable to even think. They were crying, they were upset, and so finally they get to a payphone, the first payphone they saw, because it's 1975, and Ken Peterson, who was this very kind of simple, matter-of-fact guy, you know, recently married, you know, just very simple guy, very level-headed guy. He decides to call the police because he's the only one who is, I guess, composed enough to do it. And so he calls the sheriff's department and he says, you got to come out here. You know, we can't find our friend Travis Walton. We'll have to describe it to you when you get here, because trying to do it over the phone is not going to do it justice. But he's gone and we don't know where he went. So shortly thereafter, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and Ken Copeland, they're partners, they show up at this rest stop where this payphone was, and they get to the scene. They see Ken Peterson, who made the call to them, and they're like, all right, tell us what's going on. The crew has now gotten out of the truck. They look distraught for sure. And Ken begins to try to describe what happened, but he hasn't said UFO, he hasn't said aliens, he's just said, you know, we were up at the logging site, we had a contract up there, and then, you know, just it's hard to describe. And Mike Rogers jumps in. He's like, we saw a UFO, and a ray of light hit Travis, and then he disappeared. And the sheriffs are looking at them like, really? And so they stopped them and were like, all right, I need to search your truck to make sure you guys aren't under the influence of something. And they're like, we haven't done anything. We've been working all day. They search the truck, nothing. They check each of them to see if they're sober, and their field test showed they were all sober. And the Sheriff Gillespie, who was the overall in charge sheriff, even though he was a total skeptic, and so was Sheriff Copland as well, he would say about that first engagement with the 6 crew members that they were obviously shaken up by something. Something had happened. They don't know what it was, but they were shaken up. And what Sheriff Gillespie believed was that they were creating a hoax to cover up a real crime. He believed that they had harmed Travis Walton, and they were using a UFO to cover it up. But he also was thinking to himself, like, this is a bad hoax. It's not very well planned. They don't really have their stories really lined up particularly well. They're not doing a good job explaining it. The only thing they're doing well is acting scared. A couple hours later, the sun's starting to come up because it was super late when all this happened. And Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland have organized this huge search effort up in the forest where Travis had gone missing. And the crew members, they're all there as well. A bunch of volunteers showed up, and they are scouring the area. I mean, they got dogs out, they got these huge teams looking everywhere, and they can't come up with anything. I mean, they're looking everywhere, there's no sign, there's nothing. There's nothing from Travis. And so while this is all going on, Sheriff Copland and Sheriff Gillespie have started coming over to Mike Rogers and the rest of the crew and being like, hey, if you just tell us where Travis Walton's body is, like, we'll go easy on you guys. Like, we know you did it. And they can feel that the pressure is really mounting, that if they don't find Travis, even though they didn't do anything, according to their story, they're going to face serious repercussions, because that's the way the world works.
They got to blame somebody. Yep, they got to blame somebody. And the only people who are, even if you're telling the 100% truth, you know what? We don't want to scare people anyways. You guys are murderers. Yep, we're going to throw you in, for life in prison. Yep, even knowing the truth of the matter is, Travis was probably taken by aliens. I actually do 100% believe him. I actually am I do believe Travis was abducted. Because I do believe in this stuff. I do believe in extraterrestrials. I love talking about this stuff. This is definitely one of the most interesting stories I think I've ever heard. The fact that the movie actually did a very, what I think, decent job of describing the situation so far. I mean, it was pretty, spot on, close to this.
You don't get to say aliens did this and not have any blame placed on you, because there's no proof. They just have their own eyewitness testimony. That's it. And so the crew has
and they could be covering for each other.
Very worried about what's going to happen. They're worried about Travis, of course, but they're starting to see that, like, they're going to be prosecuted for this unless they find Travis. And so they're all very stressed out. And they noticed during the search, this first day of searching, that these 3 guys wearing red jackets had these tools that were scanning the ground, almost like a metal detector. And Mike Rogers, he was hoping that during this investigation that they would have people come out that were like paranormal investigators. I guess maybe he was naive to think that the police would actually do that. But he thought, given the fact that we've all said this is a UFO that zapped Travis, who then disappeared, that they would have at least one person representing the kind of paranormal side of the investigation coming out.
Nope.
And so he sees these guys in
because they immediately did not want to take it that seriously. Because back in the 70s, man, even if there was a UFO sighting, I mean, the government would do their utmost best to keep your mouth shut, right? And the fact that this was like a whole community thing, I mean, it would have been very tough for the government to kind of make a step in, right? So, like, the police and them probably just did not take it seriously at all. Again, it was an unfortunate situation where these guys come back from the mountains and they say their friend's missing. I mean, I can understand why it might look like it could be a possible murder situation where they're just like, oh, now they're making up this cockamamie story about a UFO. But the fact of the matter is, again, like he said, these were guys that were probably pretty loved by their community, especially like Travis. And, the movie presented Mike was also, I think, a very beloved person. So, like, they just could not picture these guys doing this, right?
With their special tools that seem like a metal detector, and his gut says they're paranormal investigators. And so Mike goes over to them and he's like, hey, what are these tools you guys are doing? Like, what is this? And they look at him and they're like, oh, well, this tests for radiation. We're scanning for radiation in the area. And he asked them, like, well, what group are you guys with? Are you with the sheriff's department? And they just didn't really answer him. They said, oh, we're just checking for radiation in the area. That's just what we do. And Mike sees an opportunity, because when that ship emitted that ray of light that ultimately blew Travis Walton 20 feet and then, evaporated him or something, they were within range of that big ball of lightning, and they were very much in the kind of cone where, had there been radiation coming off of that ship, he believed that perhaps they would have been hit with it. And so we asked the guys with the red jackets on and their little radiation tools to scan the crew's jackets and bodies to see if they were radioactive. And so the crew comes over and they scan them, and there's nothing. There's no trace elements of radioactivity.
Yeah, I don't think they're close enough, right?
And then Mike realizes that from the time they called the sheriff until this search, they had all the crew gone home and changed, then come out to do this search. And so he thought, well, then, any of the radioactive materials would have been on our clothes, which aren't here, but we have our hard hats in the back of the truck that were out here the whole time. They were potentially exposed to whatever was out there from the ship. Can you test those? And so he brought over one of their helmets, and the guy in red scans his helmet, and the ticker goes all the way over, fully radioactive.
Wow, okay.
And the guy in red looked up at Mike and looked down at the helmet, and he's scanning it, and he's looking at him kind of trying to size him up. And then he turns and he kind of gestures at the other two in red and tells them to stop doing what they're doing. And they come over and they're scanning the helmets as well. And then, without any indication of what the results were, what this meant, because Mike is kind of waiting for them to tell them what's going to happen, the guys in red just turn around and say, okay. And they just start walking away. And Mike's like, well, wait, what does this mean? And they don't turn around, and they just walk away from the search site.
Oh, oof. Because I feel like they kind of knew, that high of radiation, it goes all the way just like that. Yikes.
But the other crew are watching this happen too, and Mike and the crew are trying to get them to come back, but they're not turning around, they're just leaving, and then they're gone. And so Mike goes over to the sheriffs, who they know the sheriffs think they did something to Travis. These are not their friends, but they figured we need to ask them who those guys in red were. So they go over to Sheriff Gillespie and they're like, hey, who are those guys in red jackets with the radiation detectors? And Sheriff Gillespie's like, who?
Oh my gosh.
Radiation. Everyone here is here because I ordered them to be here. Who are they? Where are they? And he's like, well, they just walked over there. They went around the corner there. And Sheriff Gillespie's like, well, I didn't order them there. And it would turn out that they couldn't locate these three people. No one knew who they were. Mike went around and asked anybody who seemed like an authority figure if they knew who these people were. They asked people if they had interacted with them, and no one knew.
That's
so after
terrifying.
The search that goes on.
Oh my gosh. No, they left that part out of the movie. Yeah, that was never described to me. There was three men who just randomly showed up, and they seemed like nice guys. But the second the radiation stuff started happening, they decided, okay, we're going to get out of here. I think we got all of the evidence we need. That kind of tells me something. That's pretty unsettling. Yeah, and the sheriff didn't even know who they were. Wow, that's pretty crazy stuff. Yeah, they were probably with the government.
A couple of days, turns up nothing. There's no sign of Travis. The town of Snowflake, Arizona really turned on the 6 crew members. Everybody believed that they had done something to Travis. That this UFO thing was a hoax, and that they harmed Travis, and they were using this as a cover-up. And the sheriff department, they really perpetuated that.
I just thought of this. I wonder if the reason why those 3 men in red jackets left was because if they had actually testified for these guys, that would have proved that something was there. And the government, of course, at the time was very hushy-hushy, let's not talk about this, so they just decided, let's get the fuck out of here while we can, before anybody questions us, right? I wonder if that was the case. Maybe they're going to ask him, hey, you guys could testify for us and get us off this. There was something here, right? And I think they just rather just get out ASAP. That is pretty next level unsettling, I actually have to say. Wow.
They were pretty open about, this is not a UFO situation. This is not an alien abduction. This is a missing person case. And frankly, we believe the UFO thing is a hoax. National and international media had picked this story up, and it became this massively viral story all over the world. And news media outlets are converging on Snowflake, Arizona, and they're inundating the sheriff's department with requests for more information about this alien abduction, and it's really frustrating the 2 sheriffs who are leading this investigation, Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland. And they were already skeptical and really upset about feeling like they were being taken advantage of by these crew members, this hoax, right? That's what they believed it was. And so Sheriff Gillespie and Copland decide, you know what? We're going to just cut through all the BS here, and we're going to make these boys take a lie detector test. So they go out and get one of the country's best polygraph examiners to come in and administer a lie detector test on each of the 6 crew members. And so one by one over the course of the day, each crew member was tested for 2 hours, same questions, all centering on the criminal side, the kind of foul play angle for Travis Walton. They all go through it. And it turned out that 5 of the 6 had all shown that they were telling the truth.
Okay, so there was
the
the one.
6th person, it was just inconclusive. It didn't mean that he was lying. It just meant that the test wasn't done very well. And this polygraph examiner had anywhere from a 92 to 98% accuracy rate. He was one of the best in the country. And he even would say, like, it would be so difficult to fake that. To have 5 people, let's say this is all a big hoax, and
You would think that somebody would slip up, yeah. And the one guy, of course, it was just inconclusive, and they kind of showed it in the movie, even though I'm not sure if the guy was like that in real life, where he was just being a rebel and an asshole about it, and he just didn't want to answer questions because he just felt like he was going to be, the guy's pretty much fallout guy, like he's going to take the heat for it kind of person. I don't know what was really going through his mind at the time, but yeah, the fact that 5 of the 6 guys told that story and it was all true. I mean, you'd be surprised. Like, I genuinely believe them at the end of the day. I truly do. I mean, people ask all the time, why not make these guys take a lie detector test? Or like, the whole Satori and Cody thing, for example. People are like, let's make them do a lie detector test, see if they're really lying or something. The fact that these 5 guys did that and they were not lying is pretty impressive.
Travis Walton. It would be almost impossible to have 5 people be able to pass my examination and have nobody slip up. They were telling the truth. And so the examiner tells the sheriff, and Sheriff Gillespie is dumbfounded because he believed that they were going to find out they were all lying and that this could just be a pure criminal investigation.
Not that easy, no.
Let's go find Travis Walton's body. But now the examiner's saying they're telling the truth. And so Detective Gillespie and his partner are like, now what do we do? And then 5 days after Travis's disappearance, Travis shows back up. During numerous interviews, Travis would say that he remembers waking up on a road and he didn't recognize where he was, but it was nighttime, it was raining, and he sensed a very bright light above him. And so as he's laying, he kind of turns his head to look up into the sky and he sees what looks like the underside of that ship, because he remembered how struck he was by the beauty of the kind of engineering underneath that disc UFO they saw in the forest. It looked the same. His vision was not great, but he's looking up and he's pretty confident that's what he's looking at. And then it flies into the sky and it's gone. And he's left in total darkness on a road in some place he doesn't know. And he remembers standing up and feeling very weak and depleted and dehydrated. And he just knew that he had to get to civilization. He had to just go in a direction and find someone who could help him because he was so weak and he would die out there if he didn't find someone who could help. And so he musters the strength to stand up and he starts kind of staggering down the road. And eventually, through just adrenaline, he just starts running. And luckily, he sees up ahead there
Forrest Gump it, yeah.
a rest stop. And at rest stops, there's payphones. And he makes his way down and he goes to the payphone and he has change in his pocket still. He puts it in the payphone and he ends up calling his brother. And his brother he can't believe he's talking to Travis because Travis is probably supposed to be dead at this point. He didn't believe it was Travis, but Travis just said to him over and over again, "It's me. They brought me back." And he tells him where he is because now he recognizes that this rest stop is actually in Snowflake, Arizona. When his brother picks him up, Travis would say that he believed that this was just minutes after, the initial abduction. He didn't even know he had been abducted. This is like he's coming to and he's like, man, what happened? Like I was just over at that clearing where I saw this ship and now I'm over here. Like, what am I doing here? And so Travis's brother is looking at him like, where have you been? We've been so worried about you for the past several days. And Travis, who was kind of almost catatonic, he's in shock. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks at his brother and he's like, what do you mean days? And his brother's like, you've been missing for 5 days. And so Travis would say that when he heard this news, this revelation that he had been missing for 5 days, it absolutely put him into shock. He was in a catatonic state where he couldn't make sense of it, and so he just sat.
Okay, so yeah, he went into a catatonic state. Okay, so in the movie, it's presented that he's already there. He won't even let people touch him. He just keeps screaming and whatnot. Like it was like a horror film. Like, oh my gosh, what did they do to you kind of stuff. But here it's like, what happened, man? What happened?
Out there quietly, and his brother's looking at him, not really sure what to even ask. He asked a couple times what happened, and Travis just didn't answer because he didn't know. He couldn't explain it. And so Travis's brother decides, instead of just immediately calling the police, I want to bring you to a hospital because clearly that needs to happen. And frankly, with the media circus, as soon as they find out you're back, it's just going to be mayhem, and I want to make sure you're taken care of first.
Smart man.
So he drives to Phoenix, Arizona, and he brings him to a hospital. And he asks the doctors to be discreet, and he has a doctor do an examination. The doctor knew who Travis Walton was because he'd been following the news. And he's doing an examination of Travis, and he was malnourished and he was tired and looked very sick, but there was no physical wounds with the exception of he had one puncture site in his arm, in the crook of his arm. Travis was not a drug user, so it wasn't like that was, a mark from using drugs. It was a puncture site, and they assumed someone had recently put a needle in his arm. And also the doctor drug tested him and tested his blood, and there was no drugs in his system. It wasn't like he'd been using any sort of substance. So he kind of had a clear bill of health, minus the injection site and looking pretty ragged. And so after the examination, Travis's brother brings Travis back to his home in Phoenix, Arizona. As soon as they get back, his home phone is getting constant phone calls. It had made its way to the sheriff's department back in Snowflake, Arizona, and they are nonstop calling Travis's brother. Like, hey, we hear he's back. We have to talk to him. We have to talk to him. Sheriff Gillespie, he drives all the way to Phoenix. He goes in and he sits down to talk to Travis. And Sheriff Gillespie would say that Travis looked like he was in shock. He looked like he had been through something traumatic. It did not seem like he was acting. And he starts asking Travis what happened. And Travis, he does mention the UFO. He mentions seeing this thing in a clearing. He gets struck by some light. He doesn't know what it was. And then, he's on the road 5 days later, and he can't really make sense of what happened. He just didn't really know what happened over the 5 days. And finally, Sheriff Gillespie just kind of doesn't really give up. He's like, well, we have no way to arrest him. We have no proof of anything. And so we decided we're going to be in touch, and he drives back. And then media starts showing up. Huge news trucks start showing up outside. Everybody found out because this was a huge story.
Yeah.
He was.
Only a matter of time.
Wanted answers. Finally, the National Enquirer, they reached out and they said, hey, if you give us an exclusive story, if Travis speaks to us about what happened to him, we will get you out of here. We'll bring you to a private location, and we'll even pay to have Travis undergo a whole other battery of tests that are not typically done to see if they could figure out what had happened to him. And so they agree to go with the National Enquirer.
Okay, so I'm assuming that's who the people were. Like when Travis in the movie, when Travis first, calls, right? And it kind of makes more sense that he was able to use a payphone now, because in the movie he was butt-ass naked, just laying next to the store. He used the phone, but how did he have any change on him when he was bare-ass naked? It kind of makes sense that he was back with his clothes and everything, and he had money in his pocket, so he was able to call. I guess they just wanted it to be a little bit more scary for the movie, because the movie, it showed it in definitely a more frightening light, what happened to him. And that's bizarre. This is bizarre to listen to. Holy smokes, man. Holy smokes. And the first thing that they did was, like, for some reason they called, not a doctor or anything, but in the movie they called, like, that guy who was like about a UFO. He was like an enthusiast about UFOs and stuff, and he was trying to push like questions on Travis, and Travis couldn't even talk. So the movie definitely did it in an more interesting way, for sure.
By the time he's actually sitting there looking at the National Enquirer, he's had a little bit of time to maybe let his memory kind of kick back in about what had happened. And he's having these flashes of memory of what happened over those 5 days. Because initially all he could remember was seeing the craft and then being on the road 5 days later. And so when he's sitting down with the National Enquirer people, he begins to recall what actually happened over those 5 days. And so this is what he said happened. He said that he remembers getting out of the truck and walking up to this craft. And he remembers his crew members yelling at him to come back. He knew they were yelling at him to come back. He just wanted to look at the craft a little bit longer. And then right as he was about to turn around and head back, the craft started moving. This loud kind of mechanical, eerie sound is being made. And before he had a chance to run back, he gets hit with this lightning bolt of some kind. Then he remembers being in the presence of some doctors. He saw white lab coats, masks, and facial coverings, and he's kind of in and out of consciousness, and he's this orange light around him, but he definitely sees what looks like medical professionals, and he's thinking to himself, whatever happened with that ship, it must have hurt me, and my
Yeah,
crew must have
yeah.
scooped me up and brought me to the hospital. And so in his kind of in and out state, he's aware that he's around medical professionals, at least what he believes are medical professionals. And at some point, his
In
vision
some way.
clears. It goes from foggy and he's in and out to being pretty much lucid. And he looks down at his chest, and there's a rectangular box sitting on his chest that he didn't recognize. It didn't really look like modern medical equipment. It just looked like this almost like rock sitting on his chest. And he looks at that, and then he looks up at one of the people who's wearing a mask, who's working on him, one of the medical professionals. And this person is working on this box, and then the person looks at Travis Walton and then leans in to look even closer at
Oh my
Travis
God.
Walton, and Travis is horrified. It was this grayish, thin, narrow-headed figure that was very short, maybe like 4 feet high, who was looking in at him, and its eyes were like slits, and it's looking at Travis. And Travis, who's unbelievably scared at this point, pushes everything off of him and rips out all the cords that are attached to him. He kind of topples off of this table that he was on, and he realizes he's in a fairly small room, and there's 3 of these humanoid creatures in the room with him. And he picks up the biggest instrument he can see next to the table that he was just laying on. He didn't know what it was, and he starts kind of wildly waving it at them and screaming to leave him alone, like, get away from me. And he's trying to make sense of what he's looking at, and the 3 figures in lab coats start walking closer and closer to him. And they're just kind of looking up at him, trying to study him a little bit. They get all the way up to him, and he's waving, and he's almost about to hit one of them when they just kind of abruptly turn around and leave the room, leaving him alone in this kind of examination room. And as soon as they leave, he watches them go down the little, outside the door, down the little hallway, and they turn left. And so he's practically paralyzed with fear, but he knows if he can't get out of this room,
Holy
he's done
shit.
for. And
Okay, so it's not like what I thought. Okay, so the movie, yeah, definitely showed it in more of a horrifying light in comparison. Not trying to torture him, but like just understand him and kind of get to know him a little bit. Like just trying to figure out what is this guy, you know, what's his deal, right? Huh.
So finally, he kind of gets himself together and he walks past the examination table. He goes down the hallway outside of the door, and instead of going left where they went, he kind of sneaks off to the right and starts walking. And he comes to another room, and it's a room that has a single chair in it. It's this tiny little room with a chair, and the chair is turned away from him. He begins to peer around the chair, and he sees that no one is sitting there. So he goes in front of the chair, and he's like touching the wall, looking for a doorknob or any sort of mechanism that can get him out of this room. And he said, like, the room, it was like this perfectly flat. Everything was flat and smooth. There was no door handles. He couldn't find a way out, and he ultimately sees on the chair that it looks like there's some buttons on the chair itself. And he pushes all these buttons on the chair, and nothing happens. And then in the doorway where he came in, suddenly a person, a man, appears in the doorway, who's wearing what looks like a spacesuit, like an astronaut suit. And Travis is so immediately relieved, even though the weirdness of him being in an astronaut suit is pretty high. But he's like, it's a human. And he doesn't know what to think about the fact that he's now excited to see a human, right? Like, it's terrifying that you were just around these non-humans, but he's like in panic mode now. He sees another human being and he runs over to him and he says, please, you gotta help me. I don't know where I am. You know, where are we? What is this? What's going on? And he notices that the eyes of this person inside of the spacesuit, it's a man who at least looks like a man, but his eyes are distant. He's not making eye contact with Travis. It's like he's in a trance. And he said his eyes just seemed off, like they weren't focused on him. It would be like if you're talking to someone, but they were like permanently looking away from you. There was just something off about him, and he never spoke.
This is
so
bizarre.
He asked this guy, like, where are we? And the guy takes him by the arm, and he just starts leading him back into the hall where he came from, and continued down the hall, not back towards the room where he was originally, but down the hall in the other direction. And they get to another door, and he opens it up, and Travis the whole time is like pleading with this guy to help him. And he thinks that this guy is helping him. He thinks that this is his savior. And he feels relieved that a human being, albeit a strange human being, is helping him. And eventually he stops asking him any questions because the guy in the spacesuit's just not reacting to him. They open this door and they go down into this huge hangar where there's all these spacecraft that look just like the one that he saw in the clearing, that Travis saw in the clearing. And they start walking down between all these spacecraft that are just hovering, much like they were hovering in the forest, seemingly able to just defy gravity. And the whole time, this guy in the spacesuit's saying nothing, and Travis is like, what is this? What are these craft? Is this military? Saying nothing. They walk to the far side of the hangar, and they open up another door, and they go into another bright white room. And there's 3 more human-like people with the strange eye thing going on in spacesuits that are standing there next to another medical table, and they're looking not at Travis, but their bodies are aimed in the direction of the door they came in through. Travis goes in and he sees these 3 and he thinks, these people are here to save me. Like, again, I feel relieved to see humans.
It almost feels like, you know, these extraterrestrials kind of just wanted to make sure that Travis wasn't afraid. They wanted him to feel like he was perhaps, you know, comfortable around his own kind, right? Like the human beings that may have some off things about him, but he felt like he was more safe than he was with the extraterrestrials. I wonder if if they were the extraterrestrials he had literally just seen, but they kind of camouflage themselves as people, which may kind of prove another theory about, you know, the world, how people always say, like, there could be already among us, we're just not aware of it. That could be a possibility too. This kind of adds into that theory just a little bit. Maybe they thought this is the only way to kind of make him more comfortable and to calm him down before he hurts one of us, right? Is just to play along, right? Interesting.
Humans, albeit strange humans, but nonetheless humans. And the guy who had brought him in there continues to lead him over to the 3 other people, and they pick him up and they put him on the table, and he starts kind of resisting because he doesn't know what they're doing. They're not speaking. He's like, what are you doing? And they force him onto this table, and he's feeling pretty weak at this point, and they take a gas mask and they put it over his face, and then he blacks out. And his next memory after that is when he woke up on the road, and
wow,
above him that flew away, and he had to run down to the payphone to call his brother. Travis did not immediately go and speak to the crew members that were there that night. It took quite a bit of time. You know, he was talking to press, he was, you know, doing interviews, the police wanted to talk to him. There's a lot going on, but he eventually got together with the other 6 crew members, and they all met up at Mike Rogers, the crew boss's house, and they just said, you got to tell us what happened. And so he sits down and he tells the story. All of them believed him. They didn't want to believe him, but they believed him because they saw the first half of this story. They saw it for themselves. And once he was done telling it, they didn't really have that many questions. They just felt bad. They felt like if they had just stayed there and taken Travis, he wouldn't have been taken, but they didn't know that. And so all of them would leave Mike's house that day, and they would all go their separate ways. They did not stay in touch. They went their separate ways. It was like this hugely traumatic event that even to this day, you know, 40 plus years later, when they talk about it, they're often brought to tears. Ken Peterson, his interviews are particularly striking because when he talks about it, you know, he's an older man now. And he says, to this day, I'm scared to look out my window because I'm afraid I'm going to see a spaceship. And he starts crying when he talks about it. I mean, this had a profound impact on these 7 men. And some of them didn't do so well. This whole story, it ruined their credibility. Even though this is, you know, the most believable alien abduction story, the truth is most people think it's a hoax. You know, one of them, like his own family, basically disowned him because they felt so embarrassed about this whole story. They don't believe him. So if this was a hoax, like to what end? What did they get out of it? Nothing. It damaged their lives. Following this case over the span of 40 years, there would be 16 lie detector tests taken. 5 by Travis Walton and 11 by the remaining crew, and they would all pass. The one member of that initial polygraph set, when 5 had passed and 1 was inconclusive, he was retested, the same exact test, and he did pass.
Wow.
This is one of those things where
no way. He actually did take the test and actually passed the next time. No fucking way. So that's all 6 of them that were telling the truth. How do you explain that? How did they not fuck that up? It's crazy.
We're left with this incredible story.
Crazy.
Where modern technology says they're telling the truth, but we can't fit that truth into what we think of as normal life. And so we've just decided that there's going to be a group of people that believe, and there's going to be a group of people that don't.
I certainly do.
You're left to pick which side you're on. So I'd love to hear what side you sit on. Was this a hoax? Was this an abduction? Or was this something else? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you. And if you haven't already, please gently extirpate the like button and then also subscribe to my channel, turn on all post notifications.
I mean, I'm certainly on more of the believability side. There's no purpose to make up a story like this. I mean, even they knew that this could get them arrested. I believe it though because it's just so out there. The story, I mean, even more interesting than the movie. What the movie presented was just the aliens were evil, but I didn't get that feeling when I heard him telling from the point of view of Travis. They didn't sound evil. That is a bizarre story, but it's very beautiful. It's a very cool story. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'll do more Mr. Ballin reactions. All you have to do is hit that like button and let me know that you guys want to hear more thoughts. I just always love Mr. Ballin. He tells the stories the best way possible. He just gets straight to the point. So, yeah. Anyways, I'll check you out in the next video. Keep it retro. Do take care.